Oh my gosh. Hey guys, this is Jim Kettner. I am your comics instructor for Mentored Studio 2. Believe it or not, this is my second attempt at recording a little orientation video. I should have just stuck to YouTube because I've at least done this before, but I actually tried recording a whole other video on Zoom and I don't think it's saved. So I think that we've all, at one point or another, experienced losing saved work. So just know that that's how you're catching me right now, after kind of going off like this for probably like 20 minutes, half an hour. But yeah, this is just a little video supplement for this sort of initial get to know you all email. I just finished drafting, aside from this video, I've completed drafting a sort of introductory email for the class. You've all been invited into the Google Classroom by Matt. And I just think it's important to do these little sort of video components, especially at the start of term, just to let you guys know who you're dealing with, who you're talking to. We've never met. I'm not part of the summer faculty, and so I've not had the opportunity to get to know any of you or your work yet. We're coming into this blind and during the most interesting year of 2020. So it's a strange time, but I definitely didn't want to get into, even start the semester without you guys sort of being able to put a face, a voice, and a personality to the words that you're getting through email or commenting on Wake or Google Classroom or whatever the case may be. I think it's really important for us to get to know each other. I'm going to talk a bit about just the syllabus and the general course outline, but before I do that, I'm going to try to at least speak briefly in terms of myself. And again, because you guys, I don't take for granted that you know who I am, what my comics are like, how I came to this class, etc. Well, my name is Jim Kettner. I go by Ket, and that's just what people have been calling me since middle school. I'm a last name guy. My pronouns are he, him. And everyone's just been calling me Kettner since I've had my sort of middle school personality. And spoiler alert, I haven't changed that much since middle school, for good or ill. At 42, I still identify with my 13-year-old self, maybe a little too much, I don't know. But yeah, I'm a cartoonist, I'm a writer, I'm an illustrator. I know, so shocking, right, in your comics program. But I just thought I would at least tell you a bit about the kind of comics that I make, where I came into the industry, and the kind of work that I'm doing now. I don't have any visual aids like I might have in an in-person orientation, but it's probably, actually, maybe it is a surprise, because I know that I've had students who come to comics from so many different backgrounds, but I've been interested in comics since I was a little kid, and at some point could probably share ridiculous baby pictures of me in my superhero underoos. And I was always, interested in drawing comics and making stories. It's been a sort of lifelong thing for me. But in terms of my background, education, my undergraduate degree was from the School of Visual Arts. I went to SVA in the 90s. So I have some of my classmates are super duper famous now, but I went to school with Nate Powell and Raina Telgemeier and Farrell Dalrymple and who else is in part of that crew? Oh, James Jean. So those are maybe some comics luminaries of today that were just other 90s weirdos with me back in the day. I'm okay being being the sort of little teensy tiny indie cartoonist next to some of those folks, but they're all great. But that's just to sort of give you a vibe of like the generation of cartoonists that I come from, and that sort of comics community that I was part of when I was a young buck in my early 20s. But like a lot of folks from art school, I really didn't do too much with my undergraduate degree for a long time, and I spent most of my 20s, all of my 20s, and going into my early 30s, just kind of struggling to figure it out, working odd jobs, doing weird stuff, being a punk. I lived in Brooklyn, I lived in Philadelphia. I was involved in underground music scenes, different art scenes, working part-time jobs, having adventures, and really not buckling down in terms of a comics career until around 2010. And my background for those like my undergraduate comics that I did back in school, they were always really kind of big ideas, big genre ideas, deep science fiction. I'm a big sci-fi and fantasy nerd. My undergraduate thesis project was this completely unwieldy, planned to be hundreds of pages science fiction graphic novel. Meanwhile, the end of that story is I drew over 100 pages of it, never published it, and it just lives in a crate, somewhere in a storage facility in New York right now. I don't want that to happen to any of you guys. You guys are in a graduate program, so this is really about like moving forward with those goals. But a big part of I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but a big part of my teaching philosophy is to help you guys avoid some of those pitfalls that I ran into. So anyway, let me rewind a little bit. So yeah, like I didn't do a lot with that initial undergraduate degree in illustration, even though I was super interested in comics. I graduated in 2001, and skip ahead almost a decade, and it took that long for me to actually start being serious about comics and wanting to put out work professionally and actually engaging in being part of a comics community. And even though my background was doing like genre work, and even though I loved superhero comics and had these ambitions of being like a sort of science fiction author, the comics that actually got my foot in the door in terms of making work and getting out there were short memoir comics and short nonfiction pieces about music culture. My buddy, I'm good buds with Liz Prince, who's a cartoonist that maybe you guys have seen her work, and she had just started doing webcomics for a now defunct music website called If You Make It, and was like knocked on the door and like knew I was kind of a slacker with my comics, and that I just was like kind of working on things privately but never put work out, didn't self-publish, was always very shy about actually putting my work out in the public sphere, and was just like, Kettner, get on this, like you just have to do 2 pages of comics. And Dave at If You Make It is really trying to basically make a whole indie rock, punk rock comics crew. And so, I got that lit a fire under my ass, and I started doing like 2-3 page webcomics, doing kind of scene reports, doing comics about my local music community, or if I was traveling, I would do interview pieces. I was like a little roving reporter, and I would interview people in different scenes, and then come back to my drawing board in Philadelphia and do a short comic about it. And it was really cool. It was really different. I had been a comic nerd my whole life and been friends with people who make memoir comics, but it took a really long time for me to get there, and then I got a taste for it. And I had only been putting out, sort of published work for a couple of years when I went to grad school, and I went to CCA for their writing program because I also write prose. I like to spin lots of plates. I like to dabble, but like I said, I wanted to be a science fiction author, and still working on that. But I went to CCA for their writing program, and that's of course how I became acquainted with Matt, because Matt also teaches in the writing program, and so he was like the comics guy in the writing program. And even though I was working on prose, we obviously connected and became buds. But while I was in grad school, and right when I was coming out of grad school, my sort of trajectory in terms of a comics career was still with that sort of indie comics, music culture stuff. And that got me into work with Silver Sprocket. This is issue 5 of the As You Were anthology. I'm in 4 of the 5 issues, but basically this is almost an extension of the webcomics work that I was doing, where it's someone in the punk scene who, Avi from Silver Sprocket and Mitch Clem, who's a cartoonist, they wanted to work together, and they wanted to assemble a larger group of cartoonists who are in the punk community to get together and put out short stories. And so again, that was just an opportunity for me to go from more short form to, I think the longest comic I did on If You Make It was 4 pages, to longer pieces, 5 to 10 pages of memoir and music content for these anthologies. And so one of these would come out about every year, and it was just kind of like a cool annual project to put out a short piece of memoir work. And that's how people started to know my stuff a little bit better. I've done illustrations for punk bands, and drawn record covers and T-shirts and that sort of thing. And so I was kind of had a little name just in that one little corner of comics where comics and punk cross paths. And I know, I'm not alone, and other folks in the CCA faculty also have little bits of that sort of cross pollination. In terms of their interests and their careers, Nicole and Ed Luce are also part of that, populate some of, the same multiple camps. But it was coming from that kind of work that I ended up getting, me and, kind of awkward, but my ex-wife got a book deal working on her memoir. So this is my first and only sort of full length project at this point. But this is her memoir that I illustrated and co-wrote with her, and this is it's 270 pages. It's a big chunk of comics work, and it really was taking a lot of that. Some of that experience that I did in terms of doing short memoir, applying it to my partners at the time, her life, and also some of that music culture stuff, which is kind of a backbeat or a cultural framework for this stuff too. So that's kind of where I was when I came into this program as an instructor. And I think that one of the reasons that Matt hired me, if I'm being frank, is he knew from my experience in the MFA in writing program, and also from my experience of just charging through, an almost 300-page graphic novel that was under deadline, and I was working 6 days a week to finish this for almost 2 years. Being a cartoonist is no joke. It's rewarding, not always financially, but it's rewarding. It's awesome. I love it. but there's a real, there's an element of like, when you have a project and you know your goal and you like put your nose to the grindstone and you like hyper focus and you run at it and you generate work. Matt saw me go through that process with this book, you know, kind of as a, I mean, I'm not young, but as a young creator in terms of my career, where I'd only done short work and now I'm doing a full-length graphic novel, and just like try to keep that enthusiasm and that momentum. And I think that he sort of tapped me for this gig because I want to help you guys do that. I want to get an understanding of your goals with your comics and like help you stay in it, right? So much of making comics is like staying in it, and making work. But let me pull back out again to my own stuff, just so you can know. Another reason that I think that Matt hired me is because even though, as I've talked about for the last few minutes, what I'm known for is sort of memoir and music culture stuff, I like so many comics. I'm on my wall. I mean, those are all just like Marvel superheroes that I drew for fun that I just have hanging up in my house now. I like all kinds of comics. I love my superheroes. I love my like literary fiction, like comics histories, like Berlin by Jason Lutz is one of my favorite books. I love science fiction. I love fantasy. I love all ages comics. I love memoir. I love war comics. I love crime comics. Oh my gosh, like Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, like some of my favorites. I basically have like, even though I'm like punk rock indie comics guy, I have like a pretty deep shelf and a pretty deep like nerd background, nerd credentials, that I think helps because I know that so many of my students come from different places and are trying to do different things. And it can be maybe a little scary sometimes if you're like, you have a project that you're so passionate about, but maybe your instructor like has no framework for that little part of comics culture that maybe is your focus. And I'll admit, I mean, I might have blind spots and I might encounter some of your projects and I might be like, oh shit, like I don't have a super deep background in X, Y, or Z. But I also want to help you guys the most. So if you guys give me required reading to like understand your comics, I'll do my best to really see where you're coming from. But yeah, that sort of like pops out into what I'm doing now. And I'm kind of split. I'm kind of currently like spinning a few different plates in terms of my professional comics work. I have 2 comics right now that I'm self-publishing. One of them is a comic called Adult Crash, appropriate, of course, that I'm wearing my Minor Threat shirt because Adult Crash is stolen, the name is stolen from a Minor Threat lyric. But this is my coming of middle-age memoir. And again, this is more of an extension of the work that I was doing in terms of those webcomics, anthologies, and Ink and Water as well, where it's a multi-generational family memoir with kind of punk culture as a backbeat, also kind of putting into play those misspent years of my 20s and early 30s before I started to get my shit together professionally and working odd jobs. Particularly, I was a house cleaner for years. And a lot of it has to do with like class issues in terms of a bifurcated sense of class dynamics and being a voyeur sort of into the lives of wealthy people. Some of them in my family and some of them strangers. Anyway, that's a little bit of a background of that comic. And then last year I put out the first issue just to be like, you know what? I need a break from my personal shit. And The Black Land is a sword and sorcery crime comic. It's a murder mystery mixed with like He-Man and ancient aliens conspiracy theories of like the Anunnaki and really just scratching like these entirely different itches in terms of nerd content. I know you probably can't see that much, but it's like a D&D mystery, a D&D like crime mystery comic, a noir western in a Masters of the Universe science fantasy kind of setting. So that's different. That's like a totally, and it's in a different style. It has a different like approach to coloring. And then the other thing that I'm working on now is I have me and a colleague, a cartoonist named Kane Lynch. We have an active pitch for an all ages like a middle grade sort of science fiction comic that we're co-writing and co-illustrating. We have an agent, and it's like being shopped around, and that's like a totally different kind of sphere, like away from the land where you self-publish and then you just try to get your work out there and maybe generate interest or get bites from publishers from actually just being forward-facing. And then there's the other stuff where it's like, oh, you write an outline, you do character designs, you do sample pages, and then you either go directly to a publisher or you get representation and kind of fish that way. And so I have that project that I'm doing with Kane, and I have a few others like in development currently that I'm kind of working with my literary agent with in terms of like how to shop. So that's just kind of the work that's on deck currently. And I guess that's enough of get to know you shit. I've already been talking for 22 minutes. I apologize. I am a blabbermouth. But let me move on now to just briefly talk about the course and the syllabus. I've been getting at it a little obliquely as I've been talking about my background, but in the reasons that Matt hired me. But looking briefly at the syllabus, and I will go over one of my big goals in terms of the next couple of weeks is I'm going to try to schedule Wake meetings to get FaceTime with all of you guys. Ideally, I would like to schedule 3 different days where hopefully I can get 3 of you in a Zoom room at the same time, and you guys can do the same thing that I've just been doing. Do the get to know you thing. Let me know who you are, where you're coming from, what your comics are about, like how you got to where you are now, and what your goals are going forward. And I'll be honest, I was telling you a little bit about what I'm working on now because I'm your instructor, but you're also my peers. When you guys graduate, you're just going to be in the same pool of creators as all of your instructors, and we're just part of the same comics community, right? It's a deep bench of folks who are just trying to make different kinds of work, and we can be a resource to each other, not just in this program, but moving forward in our careers. But I'm not going to go through the syllabus line by line with you, but the main beats, and I'll encourage all of you to read through it, please. I tried to include pictures. I tried to use fun language so that it's not too dry, not too stiff. But just like looking at the calendar and looking at the overall guideline is there are going to be 5 assignments. 4 of the assignments are going to be exactly the same format. They might have different focus from assignment to assignment, but there's the same format. You'll have 2 weeks to give me 6 to 10 pages of loose pencils. Now, my main interest and focus in this course is to help you generate material. It's not to help you make the prettiest pictures. It's not to have you have the tightest illustration. I might, based on your individual goals, we can have smaller conversations or little focuses on those on a one-by-one, case-by-case basis. But this is mostly a writing workshop for comics. I want loose pencils. that is a step up from thumbnails, but I don't want tight work. Much like how I lost a whole Zoom recording that I tried to make. Like, I don't want you guys to give me an assignment of beautifully illustrated inked work that has some crunchy storytelling problems that you get feedback on to correct, and have you have to grapple with, oh, but should I scrap this beautiful drawing I did? I would like you guys to try to find like a nice middle ground where your comics pages for these assignments focus on expressiveness of the characters, character acting, clarity of storytelling, and your dialogue and narration. Like those are the things that are important to me to help me give you the most, what I feel is the most valuable feedback, and sort of to direct the feedback that you get from your cohort. You will have time after you work out any storytelling kinks to pretty it up, to refine those illustration techniques. You can always put in those hours later, but locking in your story is the most important part, at least in my view, for the purposes of this class, moving ahead. And so, yeah, we're basically going to go through this cycle a few times through the term, where the assignment gets posted, and I've already posted assignment number 1 early, so you can get an early jump on it if you choose to. September 15th will be your first deadline, and that's where you will submit to Wake 6 to 10 pages of comics. I know that Wake is going away at some point mid-semester, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. You will include, as part of that submission, your summary feedback template, and that's just for the rest of the folks in your cohort to give more thorough feedback. And so that's the thing. You have 2 weeks to submit 6 to 10 pages. In the week following that, you have 1 week to submit your feedback on Wake, and that includes giving sort of more precise feedback to moments, comments on individual pages about individual panels, drawings, story beats, and then 1 page of summary feedback that you'll include on that template. During that 3rd week, there is also a writing component, and if you look on your syllabus, you can see that this is outlined in the section called Thesis Worksheets. Now, the thesis worksheet are really just a series of 4 writing prompts. They're pretty short. Some of them are only a sentence. At most, they will be a paragraph. And much like how the summary feedback is intended to be, instead of a sort of micro-focused comment or critique, it's taking a step back to look at the bigger picture of your thesis. Now, this is mostly based on the work of Jessica Abel. Now, Jessica Abel is one of my all-time favorite cartoonists. I was very privileged to be in a writing residency with her a couple of years ago, and it was really fantastic and really transformative, and I really try to take some of those lessons with me into this course. But if you are not familiar with her work, she has a graphic novel called La Perdida. In the 90s, she did a self-published indie comic called Art Babe, which is, maybe a corny title, but it was kind of pieces of short fiction, totally in that 90s indie rock, very much like a 90s indie movie, 20-somethings struggling with life and love in the big city, kind of work. But she also was one of the first cartoonists I've ever seen who did comics journalism, and actually in my early music reporting comics for If You Make It, for the music journalism website, I was influenced by her work. She also, kind of following up on that, she has this book out on the wire that's all nonfiction work talking about the new masters of radio, and it's basically trying to unlock the secrets of narrative podcasting and seeing about how they can apply to other kinds of narratives. And I take a lot of the lessons and prompts from this work and that is the sort of genesis of some of these thesis worksheets. Jessica's great though, because she also does comics like Trish Trash, Roller Girl of Mars. She also, I think I identify with her work a lot because she also likes lots of different kinds of things and doesn't want her comics career to just be one thing. You guys can diversify. Like, hopefully we'll all have many more years on planet Earth, and we can, tell different kinds of stories. But basically for the thesis worksheet during that comment week, you'll just send me an email, and it might just be a requirement of like a sentence. I'll be honest with you, there have been some students who really, like, these exercises really grind their gears, but I'd be lying if, like, I've gotten feedback at the end of the term, or even people who've been like, oh, these writing prompts are such a pain in the butt, but they can be really helpful. And I'm just letting you guys know that the purpose of them is for you to keep an eye on your project as a whole, because for the comics assignments, we're looking at a little chunk of comics pages, 6 to 10 pages, and I'm giving you feedback on this. But then I need you to back up and think about your story and try to crystallize, try to have your all of the important themes and goals of the big picture of your story really crystallized, and for you to refine that and get better and better at having a very clear mental image of what your project is. And then you have those sort of little writing exercises. They might be a sentence, they might be a paragraph, and you sort of can put them on like a Post-it note and put it next to your drawing board. And then when you go to your next assignment of 6 to 10 pages, you might have that in mind and try to think about whether or not the small chunk of story that you're working on is in service of that bigger picture. And then rinse, repeat. Like, that's how it's going to go for those first 4 assignments. And then the 5th assignment is where, jumping ahead to December, the 5th assignment is going to be where you'll get a chance to take a smaller selection. I think it's 4 to 6 pages for that assignment prompt. You're going to take 4 to 6 pages that you've already submitted that in a loose pencil form, where you've incorporated feedback from the cohort, and you've tightened it up, and you've brought it to near finish, and you resubmit it. And that's the sort of being like, hey, I'm showing you this again after it's been through the ringer of feedback. You've decided as your ultimate, as the creator, what feedback you're going to keep, what feedback you're going to throw out the window, which is totally okay to throw some feedback out the window. And then you'll get to sort of work some of those illustration chops and maybe take a few more steps in terms of the visual development of those pages in your piece. And then at the same time, you're going to take all of those writing prompts from your thesis worksheet that really is just going to be, all of those assignments are just going to be emails one-on-one between each of us. And you're actually going to submit, but the 5th assignment, you'll have the opportunity to upload revised versions of all of those writing prompts together and sort of show those off to the cohort together at the end of the term, where we can basically just look at how we've all grown and evolved through that process. And I did this last year for the first time, but I'll do it again this year. I will include my own writing assignments. Like when I go into the thesis worksheet, I'm developing 3 different stories right now for my agent. So I'm doing those exercises myself. So I will be willing to sort of share that work. That I'm not just having you guys go through the paces. Like it's work that I find really valuable and helpful in terms of crystallizing a story. Anyway, I've gone on for a while. I'm sorry. One aspect of getting to know me is knowing that I'm a bit of a blabbermouth, but thank you for your patience. I'm really looking forward to getting to know all of you. And feel free to hit me up, reach out via email, you can send me a text if you have any more immediate questions about the assignment or the syllabus. And I will also be getting in touch with you all with emails in the near future to sort of specify scheduling small group meetings on Zoom, and also to clarify any questions about assignment number 1. But that's it for now. It's great to meet you all. I look forward to getting to know you over the next few months. Live long and prosper.